Well, good evening to everyone who's watching on YouTube. This is one of two talks that I give on the Shroud of Turin. The first talk details more the forensic evidence about the shroud, so what it is and what it isn't, and how the image might have been formed. This second talk really looks more at the religious significance of it. So what does the image mean and what might it tell us? What I want to do today is just take some of the material that I'm currently trying to put into a book, three perhaps are the most important ideas about what the image might mean. I've entitled the talk, as you'll see in a minute when I bring the images up, The First Gospel, ? Many people have said that the shroud might well be a visual gospel because it points out so many of Christ's most central teachings. And it's occurred to me that it could in fact be seen as the first gospel because the Matthew, Mark and Luke and so on were written from 60 AD onwards. But the shroud, if it is a burial shroud of Christ, was brought into existence at the moment of the resurrection. And sometimes think, was there any guarantee that the actual Gospels would have ever been written in the form that they were? Or if there was a guarantee that they were going to be written, is there any guarantee they wouldn't have become lost? And we know that's a serious prospect because scholars think that the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke, are based on an earlier lost Gospel, which they call Q. Now, that shows that sources, important sources of information, do get lost in history. So perhaps the shroud is, if you like, God's insurance policy that whatever else human beings might have been responsible for, the shroud itself would remain as his important statement, both as to the physical reality of the passion, crucifixion and resurrection, but also as a reminder of the hardest of Jesus's teachings. Now, just before we get into that, I know that some people may not be too familiar with the shroud itself. So whilst I'm not going to go through all the full evidence about it, I do just want to give a sort of 5-minute summary of what the shroud is. I will just, trusting to technology, bring up the images. If you just give me a moment. So hopefully you can now see on the screen the slides that I'm sharing with you. The Shroud of Turin is a 14-foot length of linen bearing the back and front images of a crucified man. You can see that on the left-hand side of the screen, it's the back image. So you're looking at the back of the head of the man going down to the feet. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the face of the man and the reverse of the back image. The reason it appears in this way is because the man, Jesus, would have been placed in the shroud by being put on top of the shroud, and then the cloth being brought up over the head down to the toes. Just one nice detail to note is that here, this dark patch here is the blood-stained sole of the foot. The reason you're not just seeing the heel, but the whole of the foot, is that when the body was put in the shroud and the material brought down to the feet, whoever, Joseph and Nicodemus who were doing it, found that the cloth didn't quite stretch to the toes, it didn't cover the feet. Rather than trying to shift the body of Jesus just to get a perfect fit, all they did was take the bottom of the linen sheet and bring it up over the feet so that it was covered in that way. That's why you see the shroud pressed against the sole of the foot. It's little details like this which really helped convince me that this is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, because I just don't see a medieval forger with the very crude artistic techniques that were available then thinking of a little detail like that. It just seems to be something which was a historical accident of no significance at all, but which help us to understand that we may be looking at the real shroud of Christ. This is the front image. So this is what it looks like to the naked eye, but only if you stand back some considerable distance. It's actually a very, very faint superficial image. And although I haven't personally seen it myself, I'm told that if you get up to within a few feet to look at the detail, the image just seems to vanish. It just evanesces because the image is so faint. What you can see, however, is the various injuries. You can see the blood flow from what must have been a crown of thorns. Here is the side wound caused by the spear. The blood ran down away from the chest and pooled around the back. You see here one nail mark. You can't see the other one because the hand covers the wrist, but also the blood flows down each arm. And again, here's the toes are cut off, so you can't see much, but you can see the blood from the nail mark to the feet. The other marks you see here, such as these white triangles, are patches sewn on by the Poor Clare nuns when the shroud was almost destroyed by fire. There are other dark stains, which are water stains, which may have been attempts to put the fire out, or may have been from when the shroud was stored in a clay amphora in a similar way to the Dead Sea Scrolls, that water collects in the bottom and causes these marks. You see here the back image. The main thing to note is that from the top of the shoulders right down to the ankles are 120 dumbbell-shaped marks from the scourging of Christ. It's a three-stranded whip used by the Romans, and they can even tell by the pattern of the marks the positions in which the two soldiers must have stood. 20 lashes from each soldier with a three-stranded whip causing 120 marks. Something I should have pointed out, down here you see on the rear view of the shroud. This is the sole of the foot, where the blood-stained foot implanted on the shroud. They analysed a tiny microscopic bit of dirt on the heel here, which came up when they analysed it, compared it to limestone samples taken from the caves around Golgotha, and found that the two were an almost precise match. It's a very rare form of limestone called aragonite, and different sorts of limestone have their own unique chemical fingerprint, as it were. So this was good forensic evidence that the shroud and the body, which had been in the shroud, had been in the area around the tombs in Golgotha. Again, I doubt a forger of the Middle Ages, medieval times, would have thought of sending for a sample from Jerusalem, rubbing it on in such quantities that it couldn't be seen by the naked eye, confident that in 400, 500, 600 years, when modern science has been invented, he'll be recognized as a genius, which of course he was. It's again this sort of detail which simply isn't consistent with it being a forgery. This is a close-up of the face again as the naked eye sees it. I'm going to cut through a lot of the forensic evidence here. People are obviously interested in how the image was formed. It's been put forward that it's a painting, or it might be a scorch mark from a cloth being wrapped around a superheated bronze statue, or even a crude medieval form of photography, even though it wasn't invented until 400 years later. In short, all of those theories are false. We don't know how the shroud image was formed, but we know we can rule out all of those popular theories. The reason, at its most simple, is this. If you look at the actual cloth, this was one of the samples cut from the edge of the shroud when the carbon dating happened in 1988, which appeared to show that it was a medieval forgery. You'll see that each of those three strands of linen is about 1/3 of a millimetre across, so it's a very fine piece of cloth indeed. And when you look under higher magnification, you see that each strand of linen is formed of hundreds and thousands of microfibrils. The shroud image is caused by those topmost microfibrils undergoing some process which yellowed them. If we look in even more detail, you can see that underneath the top microfibrils, the linen is not coloured. So it's an incredibly superficial image, and this has defeated all scientific explanations as to how it can be done. For instance, a scorch will just run all the way through the cloth instantly. But what might cause 2 or 3 microfibrils to become coloured, but the ones next to it not? And then when you pull back, you see that that's done in such details to cause the image that you see in the shroud is completely unknown. What we do know is that there is no paint causing that image. Nothing has been applied to the cloth itself to create the image. What appears to have happened is that those individual microfibrils have undergone a biochemical change in their composition. It's a bit like if you leave a newspaper out in the sun, it will gradually go yellow because the radiation from the sun damages the fibers. something like that has happened to the Shroud. People obviously speculate that the moment of the resurrection released some form of energy or radiation which might have caused the image, but that's as far as we can get. I'm not going to go further into what the possible cause of the image is, other than to say all of the explanations that have been put forward, painting, scorching, and so on, have essentially been disproven. There is no scientific evidence that they're correct. It remains an enigma, and it remains the only one of its kind in the world. If you think of how many billions of people have died over the last 2,000 years, many of them in bed or covered in sheets or shrouds, none of them have caused this image. It's entirely unique to the Shroud of Turin.